care of yourself and each other. Good night.
We keep asking, how did so many people die in Portland during the heat wave? Well, now we're finally getting some answers about where those people lived and why they weren't able to keep themselves cool.
Of those 8 who had an air conditioning unit, 7 had them unplugged or they weren't working.
And while we all had to deal with those extreme temperatures, some parts of Portland had it worse than others, and it really did depend on where you live.
Often what we end up seeing is apartments in the upper floors of a building are 15, 20, 30 degrees, sometimes hotter than the bottom floors of that structure.
Also, do you remember all of those sexual misconduct allegations at Linfield University? Well, now the fired professor who blew the whistle has something to say.
If you could go back, would you do this again?
I honestly don't think I had a choice.
Here's the story.
And I'm Dan Haggerty. Thank you for being with us in the 10th best place to live in the U.S. Do you know that? U.S. News and World Report. They had the Rose City rounding out the top 10, which begs the question, how bad is the rest of the country doing right now? I'm kidding, kind of. The ranking considers the job market, the quality of life, the number of people flocking to an area, desirability, and overall value. And trust me, I totally recognize that there are so many things about this area that no other city can duplicate, maybe on the entire planet. But you know me, I like to kind of look at the details of this type of stuff, and specifically this chart of quick stats, namely the fact that the average annual salary of $58,000 a year can't get you anywhere close to responsibly owning a home in the median price range of $515,000. So anyway, hi. Welcome to the story. If you think Portland is in the top 10, should be in the top 10, deserves to be in the top 10, tell me why. I'd like to know. What do you love most about this area? Send me an email to thestory@kgw.com. That's kind of how this show works. We talk a little bit differently than other newscasts that you'll see on air, and it's okay to disagree with the way that we tell a story. At the end of the day, we just really want you to weigh in and be part of this show. Tell us what you want to see covered, how you want to see it covered. Tell us what's important to you, and we'll get to work on it. Email us, find me on Facebook, or use Twitter in the hashtag #HeyDan. Now let's get to the big story. And our big story tonight has been the big story for a while. For almost 2 weeks now, we've been trying to get more answers about the more than 100 people across Oregon who died in the heat wave. We haven't gotten a lot yet. We've got some stuff, zip codes and some racial and gender breakdown, but that's about it. We've still been asking questions, though, every night on this show because we want the specifics about where these people lived when they died so we can figure out a little bit more about what went wrong. And no more. Next time there could be some record-breaking temperatures showing up in our forecast. Now today, we finally got some more of those answers. Multnomah County released a report and confirmed that at least 54 people in the county died in the heat. There are some more suspected deaths, but right now they're waiting to confirm the exact cause of deaths in those other cases. Now, those 54, more than half lived in multifamily housing. So that's stuff like apartment buildings or duplex. And many of those people also lived on an upper floor. Now, at least 4 people died in affordable or transitional housing. 2 people died in assisted living facilities, and at least 2 people were homeless and died in their cars.
All right, Pat, let's talk about this for just a minute. I wanted to talk about what was in the homes that these people had to keep them cool. Nobody had an air conditioning. The people who did, they were either not working or not plugged in or not turned on. And some people had fans, but those didn't really seem to work either. Even in some cases, they were saying it made it worse that they had a fan.
Right. Well, the idea is that if the temperature that the fan is blowing is cooler than you are, it'll help cool you down. But their point was when the indoor temperature is 90 degrees or higher, which it was in a lot of places, now you're just blowing hot air onto your skin and making things worse. You're making it harder for your own body to cool off. So it's deceptive, but it's real.
What about the air conditioning situation? What more did we learn about that?
Yeah, well, that's just brutal. Most people were living in places that just did not have air conditioning. There were 2 or 3 in some of the high rises that are public housing that were built way before you needed air conditioning. So it's just not there. And then, as you mentioned, there were 8 who did have some form of air conditioning, but they told us that only one of those 8 was actually working and it could not keep up with the heat. So very sad, but it just shows you sort of the pathetic state of cooling systems throughout our city with the most vulnerable people.
Now, this is just kind of a preliminary snapshot at this point. There are different organizations, or I guess the county, the state, they're putting together their own more robust reporting on this. And apparently they're rushing through it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what they said about that today. And I'm wondering what more you think we'll learn of any consequence that might give us a bigger understanding about what happened.
Sure. Well, the county said that usually a deep dive like this would take a year. Instead, they're going to put it together in a month, and they're giving us kind of the brief preview 2 weeks in from the heat wave. And that's because usually it takes so long because they want all kinds of in-depth reports, and they want to interview everybody for hours. And, what did you do? What could have been done? Where did we miss things? And instead, they're going to fast track that and say, come on, give me your top 3 things. What happened? That sort of thing. So I think some of the things they're going to do, which are pretty obvious to the rest of us, is they're going to really look at 211 hard, because we're crying out loud. That's where all of us were telling people to call that weekend of the heat wave, and they didn't have any staffing. They all went home. Are you kidding me? So they're going to make sure that never happens again. Also on the buses, people were being thrown off the buses because they didn't have fare, but they were on there to stay cool. They're going to make sure that never happens again. They're going to look at probably opening more cooling centers closer to people on the county scale, because they had those 3 big ones that were open 24 hours, but it was kind of a hassle to get to them. And then one other thing that I'm kind of hearing whispered about is one thing they might be talking to the governor about is next time there's a heat wave, what would it take to declare some of these tall apartment buildings without air conditioning unfit for human habitation, condemn them for a week or something, and make everybody move out? Is that possible? It sure be heavy-handed by the state, but it's something that might be considered. So that'll be fascinating to wait and see what shakes out on that.
Yeah, potentially some drastic steps here. All right. Pat Doris with the latest. Thank you, sir.
It's always my pleasure. Thanks.
Now let's talk a little bit more about the heat itself. The New York Times recently published this article with the headline, "Why Record-Breaking Overnight Temperatures Are So Concerning." And it includes some maps in there which show how many temperature records were broken during the last week of June, which was when we had our heat wave. And you can see more overnight temperature records were broken across the country than the daytime temperature records. I want to bring in Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino to walk us through why that is so significant.
It's significant because it, like Pat was talking about, it makes these heat waves just much more harder to endure and to get through. And there are health concerns because people simply can't cool down. And it's not just people, it's the natural world as well that suffers from this. So let's look at Portland's temperatures on the hottest days. That was Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, the 26th, 27th, and 28th. Here are our morning lows. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. 70, that was a new record. 73, that was a new record. And that 75 on Monday, that's the all-time hottest night we've ever had in Portland. Never dropped below 75 degrees. So obviously we set records for the high temperatures, 108, 112, then eventually 116 on Monday. But we did on the low end too, so it just made it incredibly hard to cool off, especially given the time of year, late June. The nights are shortest, so we simply didn't have a whole lot of time before the sun came back up and started heating things up again. Now, this is not anything new. We've been watching this in meteorology for years, and if you look at a graph from 1970 through 2016, you can see the trend for more nights over 55 degrees has been going up. There's a lot of year-to-year variation. That's what the light line is with the dots, but the trend, if you do a best fit and you do a statistical analysis, the trend is clearly upwards through that time period, that our nights are getting warmer. I mentioned this also impacts the natural world. What that means is stream temperatures, for instance, are getting warmer. So that impacts fish, because a lot of fish species here in the Northwest need cold water. If it doesn't get cold at night, the water stays warm, and it's kind of a accumulating impact there too. So lots going on with this. Here's that map from the New York Times. Every single dot a record warm overnight temperature. And as Dan mentioned, there were far more record warm overnight temperatures than there were record high temperatures. And we know here in the West we have plenty of those, but they also had a bit of a heat wave going on back east at the same time. So the headlines look like this. Look going forward. It is going to be cooler at night. Our cool nights will continue in the near term. We've had several cool nights in a row now, which has been great. And we've actually had some cooler days on the way as well, Wednesday through Saturday. Some hot weather is possible, especially inland in the Northwest, but I don't see any heat waves, at least for the rest of this month. So that's good news. But with a changing climate, Dan, these are the kind of extremes we expect to see and the kind of extremes we expect to see more frequently. So, you know, the target, the bar has been moving, and it's something we've been watching for decades. Back to you.
As that bar moves, the extremes get more extreme, and that's really what we're starting to see. And we've been focusing a lot on air conditioning throughout this, or rather a lack of air conditioning that contributed to these deaths. But I also want to talk about some of the reasons certain areas do get or appear to get hotter than others, like, for instance, what part of the city you live in, or whether you live near a bunch of trees, or what type of building that you are actually living in. A professor at Portland State has been studying this sort of thing for a while, and he's been mapping out which areas of Portland get the hottest and why.
Professor Vivek Chandas at Portland State studies something called urban heat islands.
I work on trying to understand the stressors that climate change puts on cities and regions and potential solutions for those stressors that cities and regions face.
For more than a decade, he's traveled around the city taking temperature measurements and seeing which areas get hotter. They've noticed patterns in which homes heat up the fastest.
Sometimes you'll find buildings that are very low slung, like warehouse type buildings. Those tend to be directly exposed, like all of the walls, all of the roof, all of that surrounding parking lot is continuously absorbing that. And so you see this real amplifying effect from the sun in and around those very low slung buildings.
Also, if your building has a big parking lot nearby, or you live next to a big road, your home is going to get hotter than others.
Most asphalt, as you might see, is on roadways and parking lots. It's black, it's dense, it absorbs heat, it's often very exposed to the sun, so it's absorbing heat all day long and holds on, retains to that heat, and then as the nighttime temperature cools, it tries to let go. It essentially moves that hot air from that hot asphalt into the ambient environment. And before it can often let go of all of that temperature, whether it's a building or an asphalt road or a parking lot, the sun comes up again and reheats it. So you see this amplifying effect in areas that have a lot of large open, exposed black parking lots, as well as large freeway complexes and roadway structures in and around a city.
And as you probably know, heat rises. So if you live high up in a high-rise building, you're going to feel it worse than your neighbors on the ground floor.
Often what we end up seeing is apartments in the upper floors of a building are 15, 20, 30 degrees sometimes hotter than the bottom floors of that structure.
On hot days, downtown Portland starts out among the warmest. But as the day goes on, the east side of the city sees the hottest temperatures.
You know, any freeway that we have in the region, like I-5, 205, 84, 26, even bigger boulevards like Sandy or Powell Boulevard or Foster, like these are areas that just are very exposed, very low-slung buildings, and what we see is that solar radiation really affecting those particular corridors very intensely.
The west side of the city does better, in part because there's a lot more shade. Trees in natural areas keep the areas around them a lot cooler. Dr. Chandas thinks it's time we start considering these factors and heat as we continue to develop the city of Portland.
It would be really a model for the entire country if the Portland metro region could create a set of building codes that would actually be heat mitigating building codes. So whether it be coloring, whether it be specific types of materials, whether it be as a certain geometry or orientation that would allow us to reduce those temperatures and actually ameliorate some of that heat.
Now, speaking of trees, we are asking you to please consider donating to Friends of Trees. They're this week's Hey Help campaign. They plant trees in neighborhoods throughout Oregon and Southwest Washington to provide some natural shade to areas that just don't have it right now. And if you'd like to donate, please open the camera on your phone and point it at the QR code that you see on your screen. You can also go to kgw.com/heyhelp. Once you are on their donation page, just select KGW in the drop-down menu under How Did You Hear About Us? The question that they usually ask there. We talked to their deputy director about what areas they're focusing on in Portland.
In particular, Outer East Portland. We have been focusing there more directly over the past 10 years. And we have been going to areas where on our maps, we see low canopy cover. So wanting to offer the opportunity for residents to get a tree either along their street or on their private property in areas where there's very few trees. And so we will try and focus on high traffic corridor areas as well. And, one example is along 82nd Avenue. There is not really the space for trees along 82nd, but that street needs trees more than anywhere, in my opinion. And so Friends of Trees works with community groups to creatively think about solutions. What could we do to make space for trees? Like working with a partner, DPave, to remove concrete, remove asphalt, and find spaces that will have a good spot for a tree to provide shade for many years to come.
Here's that QR code again. We are calling this a micro donation drive, this Hey Help campaign. Feel free to give any amount that you'd like, no matter how small. Now, there's a small college in McMinnville that's been making a lot of headlines recently for allegations like this.
When people bring forth concerns about harassment and safety, you can't fire them for doing that.
We are going to talk about what's going on with Linfield University when the story continues. Welcome back. I was just going through some comments and some of your questions during the break. Keep them coming. Use that hashtag, #HeyDan. I'd like to address a few at the end of the show. Now, we want to circle back now to a story that we first brought you back in May. It was about the big mess going on brewing at Linfield University. See, multiple students and staff has accused multiple Linfield trustees and one administrator of sexual harassment and assault. And some of those accusations sparked lawsuits, others criminal cases. The fallout even landed Linfield in the New York Times. And amid all this chaos, a tenured professor, this man, was fired, Daniel Pollack Pelsner. He says he'd been trying to get administrators to take these allegations seriously, but he tells us Linfield wanted to keep him quiet, so they fired him. Tonight, the whistleblower, as he calls himself, sat down with our Maggie Vespa to talk about his decision to take Linfield to court.
The scandal at Linfield University goes back years, before the criminal charges, before the federal lawsuit, and well before the damning headlines. For Daniel Pollack Pelsner, it started in 2019. This
is still taking up a great deal of your time. Like, this is still your life.
I'm still kind of in shock from it.
Fast forward to this week.
I honestly haven't slept much in the last few months, and
The once tenured English professor sat down with KGW to explain why he's taking Linfield to court. Months after administrators fired him, Paulak Pelsner is suing the small private McMinnville school for $4 million. The suit accuses Linfield of, among other things, unlawful whistleblower retaliation.
What would you say the goal of your lawsuit is?
My goal is to keep Linfield from ever doing this again.
Paulak Pelsner tells KGW he first raised concerns about sexual misconduct at Linfield in the fall of 2019. He was Linfield's faculty trustee at the time. A colleague came to him with a story about something that she said happened at a university dinner. She noted people there were drinking.
Another trustee who was supposed to be voting on her tenure at the next meeting had his hand on her thigh, asking if she was married and whether she would come off campus with him after the drinking stopped. I was aghast.
KGW interviewed that colleague, Dr. Jamie Friedman, back in May. Her story is in line with Paulak Pelsner's. Dr. Friedman also told us another story about Linfield's president, Miles K. Davis, pictured here on the school's website. She says in 2018, Davis approached her at another faculty event. She says he rubbed her arms and whispered in her ear, saying he was looking forward to seeing her again. The university would later confirm both the instances Friedman described happened, but add they didn't violate any Linfield policy.
I just was like, this is an environment that is not safe.
Soon, other reports from other faculty and students followed, saying Linfield trustees in particular had touched them or made inappropriate comments. Paulak Pelsner says he began quietly pushing the university to implement training and announce new policies on sexual misconduct. Administrators, he says, refused. In the process, Paulak Pelsner, who is Jewish, alleges multiple administrators made anti-Semitic comments.
It was the same time that there had been hate speech on campus, anti-black speech and swastikas, and the president said he didn't understand why people like me were upset about the presence of those images on campus.
Linfield has categorically denied that part of this story. This past April, administrators fired Paulak Pelsner. The months that followed were a watershed moment. As the Oregonian first reported, a series of students and faculty came forward accusing multiple Linfield trustees of sexual harassment and assault. The stories of 4 students are at the center of an 8-count criminal indictment against now former trustee David Jubb. One student has also filed a federal lawsuit against Jubb and Linfield. In it, she alleges the university knew he had a history of abusing students and did nothing to stop him. The whole ordeal landed Linfield in the New York Times. Paulak Pelsner's firing was the headline. Linfield has said the firing had nothing to do with the misconduct allegations, adding Paulak Pelsner was fired for cause. They won't say what the cause was. Paulak Pelsner believes this small private school was trying to minimize very public damage. Now, he's suing for millions.
If you could go back, would you do this again? Would you file the report again and raise the concerns again and keep at it and not stop?
I honestly don't think I had a choice. We're not giving up. I know what my duty is to Linfield, whether or not I'm a trustee. I know what my duty is to my colleagues and students, and I'm not going to back down on those issues.
We reached out to Linfield administrators for an interview this week. They declined, but sent us a statement. It reads in part, Linfield's priority is and will remain the education, safety, and well-being of its students. It is disappointing, the statement goes on to say, but comes as no surprise that former professor Daniel Paulak Pelsner has filed this lawsuit. We believe his claims are without merit. Now, we've reported before that the school has stressed their policies on sexual misconduct are in line with federal Title IX standards. They've also said they're investigating those policies. I'm Maggie Vespa, KGW News.
And Thank you to Maggie. Meanwhile, why don't we count some vaccines? We do this each and every night. More than 2.5 million Oregonians have gotten at least their first dose, according to the CDC. That works out to be 59.5% of the total population. So I had somebody email me the other day and say, hey, weren't we at like 70%? Why are we now down to 59.5? So that was before we were counting the number that the state was counting for us to reopen. So getting us to that 70% of eligible adults. This number is total population, because now that we're open and we're beyond that, we're talking about how many people in the state total actually have at least one dose of the vaccine. So we're counting kids, adults, everybody. Even though kids under 12 aren't eligible to get the vaccine yet, we wanted to give you an idea of how much of the state is getting vaccinated. We're doing the same in Washington, where more than 4.75 million people have gotten at least their first dose, according to the CDC. That works out to be 62.5% of their state's entire population. All right, keep sending us your questions and comments. Use that hashtag #HeyDan. I'm going to read a few when we finish the story next. All right, a couple of questions and comments coming in. This one coming in from I'm Your Huckleberry on Twitter saying, hey, Dan, I need the show to be an hour. I feel like we need more of this, and it feels so rushed. Make it happen. Whew, man, I'm tired just thinking about that. I appreciate you liking the show. Tonight's did feel kind of quick, didn't it? You know, when we get a lot of information that's important, I think it goes by pretty quickly. We were talking about how Portland made it in the top 10, what you like. So SJB Birdwatcher said, KGW and the story are reasons why Portland is a good place to live. Thank you for digging in on vital stories like deaths and the heat wave, vaccines, many things. First of all, I'm glad you find value in the show, but it's only because of the value the viewers like you bring to it. You tell us what you want us to cover. You send us really smart emails, curious emails, and things on Twitter, and then we assign reporters to it. We try to do our best to cover the news the way you at home would like to see it done. And then lastly, this one coming in from Mike and Rainbow. They emailed me and basically said, hey, was that you? I think I ran into you at the Enchanted Forest on Monday. And you're correct. Yeah, that was me. We loved it. It was our first time there with the family. Absolutely loved the Enchanted Forest. It was great. I think this is the person who said hi to me. So thank you. And I watched the story that Laurel Porter recently did on it, talking about the crazy year that they had, among the crazy years that we all had, and the comeback that they're having in their 50th year. And if you haven't been there, you got to check it out. If it's been a while since you've been there, check it out again. You can find Laurel's story, I think, on the KGW YouTube channel right now, which is also amazing. I'm done talking about the Enchanted Forest. They're going to have to start paying me for this. Thanks for being with us tonight. See you back here tomorrow.